He's meeting with House Democrats this afternoon at 2:15 and Senate Republicans at about 12:30 in about a half an hour or so. Right now, we'll take you live to the House floor here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Reverend Ezekiel Pfeiffer, Heartland Evangelical Free Church, Central City, Nebraska.
Our Father in heaven, by your sovereign hand, you make all nations, kingdoms, and empires. You raise up their leaders and ordain the rules by which they govern. You alone are righteous in all your judgments, so it is you that we trust and desire to imitate. Lord, help the honorable men and women of the House of Representatives lead by persuasion, kindness, and reason according to your scriptures. Equip and guide them to craft laws, resolutions, and amendments that will accomplish your will for our nation. By your Spirit, help them carry out these noble responsibilities with wisdom and integrity. I also ask that you would encourage their families this day. Our Savior, we eagerly await your return and your perfect justice and mercy. Until that moment, grant us patience and help us be of good courage and strong heart. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
The Chair has examined a journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the Clause 1, Rule 1, I demand a vote on the Speaker's approval of the journal.
The questions on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The journal stands approved. Gentleman from Minnesota.
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pledge of allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Smith, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to introduce Dr. Zeke Pfeiffer, who will serve as our guest chaplain today. Zeke earned his Master of Divinity from Talbot School of Theology and his Doctor of Ministry from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. He is the senior pastor at Heartland Evangelical Free Church in Central City, Nebraska. In addition to his work in the ministry, he is an avid outdoorsman and author. His first book, Man on the Run, Helping Hyper-Hobbied Men Recognize the Best Things, was released last year, and he is a regular contributor to several national outdoor magazines. He and his wife, Jamie, have 3 children and live in central Nebraska. And importantly, his favorite football team is the Nebraska Cornhuskers. It is my honor to welcome Dr. Pfeiffer. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The Chair will entertain 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas rise?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to bring attention to the EPA's recent disregard for our nation's food safety. 2 weeks ago, I learned the EPA released phone numbers, addresses, and even geographic coordinates that were collected from livestock producers. This information was requested by extremist groups, including Earth Justice and the Natural Resources Defense Council, through a Freedom of Information Act request. The EPA handed over the very personal information. I have serious concerns about the potential threat these actions pose to the privacy of American farm families, as well as the safety and security of our nation's food supply. This is yet another example of the EPA's overreach into the lives of hard-working individuals in rural America. As chairman of the Agriculture Subcommittee on Livestock, Rural Development, and Credit, I'm leading a group of 40 House members in writing a letter to the acting director of the EPA expressing our concern and asking the acting director to ensure the released information is not improperly used. Mr. Speaker, it's unacceptable for the EPA to do anything that could jeopardize our nation's food security or threaten American farm operations. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The other day it became public that Valerie Harper, the star of Rhoda, was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And she publicly went forward with that, and it was very touching. I saw her on the morning news, and she talked about it, and she said that she's doing chemotherapy. She has maybe 3 months. She doesn't know how much to live, and she said her husband says that if we can slow this thing down, more stuff may come up. They are working fast and furiously for all of us. They're not working for Valerie Harper because she played Rhoda, but they're doing this for all cancer patients. And the people that are doing this for all cancer patients are the doctors and the universities and the scientists that are funded by the National Institute of Health, all of which will get a 5.5% cut in their budget because of the sequestration. This is another example of why it was wrong for us to let the sequestration go into effect and why it's wrong for us not to make cuts that make sense. We need to put more and more dollars for cancer patients, for people with diabetes, people with Alzheimer's, people with AIDS, people with illnesses that can and will be cured. And if they can stay around for a little longer, they can come up with a cure and save people's lives. We don't need to defund or reduce the funding for the National Institute of Health. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise? Without objection, so ordered.
North Carolina, 9th District, is blessed with many wonderful, hard-working educators. Today I'd like to introduce you to one of them, Dr. Mark Edwards, who was recently named National Superintendent of the Year. Since becoming superintendent of the Mooresville Graded School District in 2007, end-of-grade test scores have soared to the second highest in North Carolina. The graduation rate is now third highest in the state, and Mooresville has become a nationally recognized model for integrating technology into the classroom. These achievements are even more impressive when you consider that Mooresville has one of the smallest budgets out of 115 school districts in North Carolina. Dr. Edwards' work should be a reminder that strong leadership, dedicated teachers, and proactive community involvement are the most important factors in the success of our students, not Washington bureaucrats or programs. Dr. Edwards, on behalf of the people of North Carolina's 9th District, congratulations on your national award. May God continue to bless you and your work in Mooresville.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Congressman Ryan's current budget proposal is a harsh austerity program that seeks to reduce the deficit on the backs of our nation's most vulnerable while only benefiting the special interests and the nation's ultra-wealthy. Under this plan, more than 30 million Americans now covered by the Affordable Care Act, including more than 70,000 residents of my district, would be at risk of losing their coverage. Medicare, as we know, would cease to exist for more than 5 million future seniors, and over 3.5 million seniors today would lose some of Medicare's preventive coverage. This plan also jeopardizes our nation's economic recovery. The Economic Policy Institute estimates the plan will cost more than 2 million jobs in the next year, reduce the GDP by 1.7%, and literally stall the economy through 2017. This is neither a balanced nor a rational approach that we need. I want to work with my colleagues here in the Congress to pass a budget that creates jobs, grows the economy, strengthens the middle class, and responsibly reduces the deficit. Sadly, this is not that plan.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
To address the House for 1 minute and rise and stand on law.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We recently learned that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, released thousands of illegal immigrants out of our detention facilities across the country in anticipation of the sequester cuts, not after the sequester became law or the cuts became reality, in anticipation. This is the latest in a string of lapses in judgment by ICE Director John Morton. Because of his repeated questionable actions, I've called on Mr. Morton to resign. Rather than making common sense cuts like reducing administrative staffing, cutting overhead, or taking other action, ICE chose to release thousands of known criminals directly onto our streets and into our communities. ICE's justification for this plan is that those individuals will remain in a monitoring program while deportation proceedings are ongoing. Really? It baffles me that ICE officials continue to insist that someone who has already committed a crime by entering this country illegally would willingly participate in a monitored self-deportation program. The sequester has started, and across-the-board cuts will affect us all. But we cannot stand by while ICE makes irresponsible decisions. I call on John Morton to resign and make a full accounting of this debacle to the American people. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I rise in honor of a very special guest of mine today, Emmanuel Vilas from Taunton, Massachusetts, who's visiting Washington with his family. Just 10 years old, Emmanuel was selected as the grand prize winner in Scholastic's National Picture President Art Contest. His charcoal sketch of Abraham Lincoln earned him that distinguished honor, as well as a 50-book library for his classroom at Parker Middle School and a trip to Washington, D.C. Emmanuel's teacher back home calls him, quote, a great role model who, quote, is eager to learn and help other kids. He practices art drawing every day and hopes to someday pursue a career in art. Today, Emmanuel is joined in the Capitol by his father, Emmanuel Sr., his mother, Karen, and his brother, Diego. I would like to welcome them to Washington and to congratulate Emmanuel on making his school, his city, and his state incredibly proud. Congratulations, Emmanuel. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker, and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, it was just over a week ago that we learned that the White House is being closed to public tours. Now, the President attempts to justify this decision, saying it's a Secret Service decision. I find this disturbingly ironic, coming from a President whose own website says that it is his mission to, quote, open up the House to as many people as possible, unquote. That he is accepting without objection the decision to prevent the American people from accessing the House, the White House, their house, the people's house. Even during some of the darkest days of America's history, our 16th President, Abraham Lincoln, championed a policy of true open doors to the White House and governmental transparency. Contrast that with President Obama, who is acquiescing to the exact opposite, closing the White House doors to the public. If the President is unable to help the Secret Service manage an 8.2% budget cut and still keep the people's house open, then the American people are entitled to some answers from their chief executive. And with that, I'd yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, the Republican budget released earlier this week will move us in the wrong direction. It promises us growth through austerity, cutting $943 billion in discretionary spending. But history has proven that it just won't work. Time and again, we see when an economy is recovering from a recession and it embraces austerity, the economy tumbles. That's what happened in Europe over the past 2 years. That's what happened in Japan in the 1990s. And that's what happened in this country in 1937. We must learn from this lesson. In fact, experts say that the Republican budget will result in 2 million fewer American jobs and will decrease the economic growth by 1.7%. Mr. Speaker, what we have to do is invest in our economy, nation build here at home in America and in Americans. This is a vehicle for growth. We should not be cutting those kinds of investments. Austerity is short-sighted, and we should reject it. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Montana rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, one of the best parts of my job is hearing from the people I serve in the great state of Montana. And while 1 million Montanans offer a lot of different ideas and a lot of different perspectives, there's one concern I hear about every day. Thousands of Montanans have reached out to my office because they are concerned about recent threats to their Second Amendment rights. Let me be clear. I do not support any efforts that infringe upon Montanans' right to keep and bear arms. I will continue to stand firm against any proposals that would threaten those rights, and that's why I'm joining Congressman Steve Stockman and many of my other colleagues in the House in signing a letter to Speaker Boehner that makes it clear that we and the people we represent are strongly opposed to any efforts that would violate the rights protected by the Second Amendment, and we will reflect that commitment in any vote on legislation that comes before us. Whether it's so-called universal background checks or sweeping bans of firearms owned by thousands of law-abiding Montanans, I will stand firm against any proposal that would threaten Montanans' right to keep and bear arms. Thank you, and I yield my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Delaware rise?
Mr. Speaker, seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to remember Judge Leonard Williams, who died recently at age 78. Judge Williams was one of Delaware's most prominent civil rights leaders and a successful lawyer and judge in Wilmington. Judge Williams spent his life breaking barriers and paving the way for others. Judge Williams was one of the first African-American students to integrate the University of Delaware and the first African-American on its football team. Judge Williams was a longtime law partner of Lewis Redding, the Wilmington lawyer who argued Delaware's Brown v. Board of Education case before the Supreme Court. He was a friend and mentor to countless members of our community. Judge Williams was part of the greatest generation of African Americans, those who fought the often lonely fight for civil rights and justice, enduring struggle and hardship to make our state and our country a better place for everyone. His presence in the state of Delaware, and particularly in my home city of Wilmington, will be sorely missed. My thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
So, Mr. Speaker, as a freshman, I'm the first to make fun of myself and, quite frankly, both parties. It seems last session's budget negotiations consisted of Democrats making videos of Republicans throwing your grandmother off a cliff. Wonky Republicans would be in the corner talking about debt to GDP ratio and other things that most hardworking Americans don't have time to think about or understand. But let me tell you what we can all understand. Republicans are doing what Senate Democrats have not done in years. We will pass another budget. So why does this matter to you? It matters because a balanced budget means jobs, opportunity, and ultimately more money in your pocket. More money in Washington means less money for you. Less money for your gas, your groceries, your rent, your mortgage, and maybe your next vacation to Florida. Now, being bipartisan, you know who understood that more than anyone? Was President Bill Clinton. And with the Republican House, the budget was balanced. And we conservatives, are working hard to balance that budget today. For your opportunity and your job, we're here working for you. Thank you. I yield my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii rise?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the Republican budget, sometimes called the Ryan budget, also called the Path to Prosperity, is really more of the same. More of the same that we've seen for the past 3 years. The only difference is it's worse. It's worse. The budget is supposed to be the blueprint and sets forth the philosophy and the policy of the majority. But look at some of the problems, and there's many of them. But let's concentrate on seniors. Let's see how it affects them. The voucher is back. Means Medicare costs are going to rise for the seniors. There's no closing of the donut hole anymore for your prescription drugs because Obamacare is repealed. And we're going to lose $810 billion in Medicaid, which is a cut of 1/3, and 2/3 of it goes to disabled and seniors. Yet the irony is that the majority says it repeals Obamacare, yet it keeps $716 billion in Medicare savings and all revenues from Obamacare for a total of $1 trillion. So $2 trillion of its balancing the so-called budget is on the backs of Obamacare, the Obamacare that it says it repeals. This cannot be what this body wants to be identified with, a path to nowhere. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's hard for President Obama to find a solution when he doesn't understand the problem. This week, he told ABC News that he doesn't believe that our country faces a debt crisis. Yesterday, Senate Democrats outlined a budget that never balances but sinks us further and further into debt year after year. The American people understand that nearly $17 trillion of debt is no way to run a country. Hoosiers know that every penny Washington borrows today will be taken from taxpayer pockets tomorrow. Folks back home know this, and so do House Republicans. That's why I'm proud to support the budget my friend and colleague Chairman Ryan introduced this week. Mr. Speaker, this budget actually balances in 10 years, something our Democrat colleagues' budget in the Senate never does. It never balances. Mr. Speaker, our budget encourages economic growth and promotes opportunity for all Americans. By simplifying the tax code, scaling back government overreach, and strengthening the promises made to seniors, our budget puts this country on a responsible, balanced path. I commend Chairman Ryan and the House Budget Committee for their work. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does... Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, well, it is time to debate the budget again. But despite the differences in this chamber, we could come together and choose to invest in our middle class. We could compromise and responsibly reduce spending while protecting the most vulnerable. We could reach across the aisle and protect the jobs of our teachers and police officers while ending the ludicrous tax loopholes for oil companies. But instead, we see another case of political gamesmanship. Instead of providing targeted tax cuts to working-class families, the Republican budget increases tax breaks for the wealthiest in the country at the expense of middle-income taxpayers who will pay an average of $2,000 per family. Instead of solidifying the safety net for our seniors, the Republican budget guts it by turning Medicare into a voucher program. And instead of healing our still fragile housing market, the Republican budget refuses to protect the mortgage interest deduction that our middle-class families depend upon. What we should be doing is working together to put the American dream back within the reach for our middle class. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I've made it a priority since day one to support pro-growth, pro-jobs legislation that encourages entrepreneurship and supports innovation, all in the name of strengthening our economy and making certain the United States remains globally competitive and is the place where the hardest working and best minds exist. To remain competitive, we must continue to have the best trained workforce in the world. Quite often, programs in Washington, D.C. are cumbersome and difficult to use. We must all endeavor to make the federal government more efficient and effective. That's why today, Mr. Speaker, I rise in approval of the Skills Act and encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this common sense legislation that will eliminate burdensome and frustrating roadblocks that prevent out-of-work Americans from accessing beneficial workforce development programs and job skills training efforts that will only help our national economy. Mr. Speaker, everyone must have a chance to succeed in our current economy, a chance to realize the American dream. Let's pass the Skills Act so we continue working together in a competitive and thriving economy.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Ryan's budget would cost millions of people to lose access to health care and tens of millions more to lose their jobs. My question is simple. Why? I've been here 802 days, and we have not considered a serious jobs bill yet. There are approximately 12 million people unemployed. It's unemployment, not debt, that's at emergency levels. When people lose their jobs, they lose their dignity, they lose their health care, and eventually lose their homes. Shame, shame, shame. There's only one responsible way to reduce the deficit. Get everyone trained, get everyone working, and get everyone contributing to the tax base. People are hurting. People are suffering. They want an opportunity. Mr. Speaker, our mantra should be jobs, jobs, jobs. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Nevada rise? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to the Republican budget proposal that's soon to be considered by the House. The policies therein were debated and soundly rejected in the last election. In Las Vegas and across the country, Americans made it clear that our budget should be a path forward for a strong middle class and a serious investment in the next generation. Instead, the Republican budget shrinks investment in infrastructure and education, cuts funding to research and development, eliminates the safety net for our most vulnerable, and ends the Medicare guarantee. Furthermore, it should include a question mark or a giant asterisk because so many aspects of it are vague and so many details are missing. This budget isn't a path to prosperity. It's a collection of inconsistent assumptions and mathematical gimmicks. It's full of phantom revenue and undelineated cuts. People in my district, District 1 of Nevada, want Congress to pass a budget that represents a balanced approach, not one based on partisan ideology that's out of touch with their priorities. So I say, let's get to work on that. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii rise? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to highlight some of the unique immigration challenges that we face. The good news is that Washington is finally focused on fixing this very complex issue. Comprehensive reform is crucial to our families, young people, and our economy. In Hawaii, for example, Filipino families often wait up to 24 years to reunite with their loved ones. We're a community of immigrants who came to Hawaii seeking greater opportunity, who toiled day in and day out working in our pineapple fields and on our sugar plantations, and yet many are still waiting to be reunited with their loved ones. This is unacceptable and unnecessary. It also hurts our economy when small businesses face unnecessary draconian audits and automatic labeling as fraudulent businesses simply due to their size, stifling their ability to grow and create jobs. We must address these unique immigration issues in Hawaii, across the Pacific, and across the country as part of our national reform legislation in order to reunite families and grow our economy. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, March is Women's History Month, and so I'd like to point out that this week the Republicans and Chairman Paul Ryan once again put forth a budget that hurts women and fails to meet the moral code of our nation. There is no morality in a budget that takes food from the mouths of struggling women and children while slashing taxes for millionaires and billionaires. These attacks on breast cancer research, on child care, on the affordable health insurance for families, on maternal health, and on education are not what we owe our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters. Make no mistake, women, especially poor women, will shoulder the burdens of these cuts. At a time when so many Americans are struggling just to make ends meet, we must do more, not less, to provide a strong safety net for all Americans. I call on my colleagues to support a budget that provides compassion of the government to help American women in need and invest in the future that they deserve. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for a minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, while I recognize that this Republican budget is just a political document that will never become law, I am still disappointed at what a cynical, cruel, and dishonest document it is. It's cynical because it repeals the protections and benefits of the Affordable Care Act while keeping in place all of the cost savings in order to pay for another tax cut for millionaires. It's cruel because it would gut Medicaid, a program designed to protect our most vulnerable seniors from sickness and death by over $800 billion. This budget would slash Pell Grants for students, food assistance for the needy families, and Head Start school programs for children. Most of all, it's simply a dishonest document. My Republican friends claim that their budget will cut taxes and balance the budget. They say they will pay for it all with trillions of dollars in savings from closing tax loopholes, but the budget conveniently refuses to name any of them. Mr. Speaker, we should reject this budget and its misplaced priorities. I urge my colleagues to support the Democratic alternative, which presents a balanced way to bringing down our deficit that doesn't leave our seniors at risk. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to the Republican budget proposal. This plan hurts the middle class, repeals health care for millions of Americans, and does nothing to guarantee seniors the benefits they earned and have been promised. The Republican budget plan introduced this week offers no new real solutions. This is the third time this plan has been introduced, even though the country clearly rejected it this past November. Congress needs to listen to the American people and work together on responsible long-term solutions. The House Republican plan has devastating consequences for seniors, our parents, and our grandparents. The Republican budget turns Medicare into an expensive private insurance program for seniors. Our country made a commitment to care for our parents and our grandparents, and it's important we uphold that commitment. Let's not forget that one day our kids will grow older and will depend on these vital programs. We need to balance our budget and reduce the deficit, but we must not do so on the backs of our middle class and our seniors. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess subject to the call of the Chair.